At first glance, it may seem that science is the fruit of the mind, an unshakable fortress of logic, where each statement follows from the previous one, like a solid bridge being built step by step across the river of the unknown. However, everything changes the moment you encounter a theorem capable of destroying that bridge with a single touch. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is just such an intellectual feat. It sounds dramatic, and rightly so, because we are talking about something more frightening than black holes and singularities, about the proven fact that in any sufficiently complex logical system, there are statements that cannot be proven or disproven. Think about it. Even if you have all the possible formulas, axioms, and rules of the game, you still won't be able to grasp everything. Some truths will forever remain beyond our reach, not because of a technical error, not because we lack data, but because that's how the structure of reality itself is arranged. If our logic is incomplete, what can we say about the physics that is built on it? And if physics is incomplete, then perhaps the universe itself does not operate according to rules, but according to a strange meta-logic that we are unable to even formulate. Perhaps we are not just looking at the world through a cloudy glass. Perhaps the glass itself is an illusion created by our desire to explain the inexplicable. Imagine a world in which you have gathered all the equations, postulates, and logical tools to finally understand how everything works. You put them together like a puzzle into a single picture, and suddenly discovered that there will always be a hole in this picture, as if someone deliberately cut out a piece of truth and hid it where no mind can reach. In 1931, Kurt Gödel proved something that still takes physicists' breath away to this day. In any sufficiently powerful formal system, such as arithmetic, there will always be statements that cannot be proven or disproven. They are both true and inaccessible. You can sense it like a phantom, but you cannot grasp it. It was not just an intellectual somersault, but a blow to the very heart of the scientific dream, to create a universal language of nature, a system in which everything can be explained, from the dance of quarks to the symphony of galaxies. After all, if the mathematical basis on which all physics is built is incomplete in nature, then physics cannot be exhaustive either. Gödel seemed to have torn off the mask of reality and said, "You will never know everything." Let's go even further. Imagine that you are the creator of artificial intelligence. You gave the machine all the rules, put in axioms, algorithms, formulas. You determined everything it can know. However, according to Gödel's theorem, even in this artificial universe, there will be questions that it cannot answer, even if you yourself know the answer. That is, your own reality will be fundamentally inaccessible to it. Now transfer this to our universe. What if we are that very system? What if the human mind is a program that simply cannot reach the depths of reality? Because everything we touch is built on absurd logic. That's why physicists fear this theorem. Not because it's complicated, but because it breaks the line between knowledge and what is forever inaccessible. Because in essence, it says, no matter how smart you are, you will always dance in the twilight. There is only enough light to see how much you will never see. And at that moment, right there, the dream of a theory of everything, of a final formula that will explain existence, collapses. Which means that perhaps we not only don't know how everything works, we will never know. Because truth is like a mirage in the desert. The closer you get to it, the further away it goes. For a long time, mathematics was considered the pinnacle of order, the last bastion of common sense, where every statement is either true or false, period. However, this feeling of stability turned out to be an illusion. At the very heart of mathematics is a hole that cannot be patched up with any axioms or logical operations. This is not a mistake or an omission. It is a feature of the very structure of infinity. When Gödel derived his incompleteness theorem, he did not simply break a couple of formulas. He showed that even if we construct a perfect, closed, strictly logical mathematical system, there will still be statements in it that cannot be proven or disproven. It's like creating an infinite library with books whose contents you will never be able to read, even though they are written in your own alphabet. But how is this even possible? The fact is that mathematics, like the language we use to describe it, is subject to certain rules. And the more complex the system, the more self-reflection it has, the more ways it has to refer to itself. It is this self-reflection that becomes a trap, because the moment the system begins to describe itself, it plunges into a paradox. One of them is the logical analog of the phrase, "This statement is false." Try to prove its truth or falsity, and you will immediately get tangled up in your own logical networks. And this is not just a philosophical puzzle, it is a fundamental limitation. For example, within the set of natural numbers, there will always be statements in arithmetic that are true but unattainable from within the system. You can sense them, predict them, even simulate them, but you cannot prove them using basic axioms. All of this leads to a truly disturbing thought. Perhaps infinity itself is not what we imagined it to be. We try to stretch it over the framework of logic, like skin over a skeleton, but it keeps tearing. Mathematical infinity is nonlinear, open-ended, incomplete. It is paradoxical, slipping through our fingers like smoke. And if physics, as many claim, is a language written in mathematics, then it turns out that our world is built on a language in which even simple phrases may have no answer. This is not just a poetic image. It is a threat to the whole idea of a universal explanation. We can build models, simulations, equations, but if there is a hole hidden in their mathematical heart, then everything built on them, from the standard model to string theory, may turn out to be a collection of beautiful but incomplete metaphors. So where is the truth then? Perhaps it is not within the system, but beyond it. But here's the problem. It is impossible to go beyond the limits of logic itself without destroying it. That's the paradox. Be honest, when you look in the mirror, do you believe what you see, or do you feel deep down that the reflection is not just a copy, but an interpretation, a fake version of reality? It's the same with our universe. An alarming question is being asked more and more often. Are we living in a reflection of something greater, in a simulation? And if so, can we trust it at all? The simulation theory is no longer just science fiction from the Matrix. It is a hypothesis that is being seriously discussed by physicists, philosophers, and IT giants. If our universe is a computational model, then like any system programmed according to mathematical rules, it is subject to the same limitations and paradoxes as Gödel's logic. The concept of incompleteness also exists in simulation. Everything that happens within it is determined by a finite set of rules, algorithms, axioms, mathematics. But if there is a Gödel flaw hidden in these rules, if there is a statement in the code that cannot be resolved, then sooner or later the simulation itself will begin to contradict itself. For example, like a glitchy program, it will crash and white spots will appear in reality. Observations that cannot be explained. Paradoxes that do not fit into any theory. And what do we see around us? Quantum non-locality, the observer effect. Matter that disappears and appears out of nowhere. A vacuum filled with energy. Dark matter that no one can touch but without which everything falls apart. Are there too many bugs to be just a coincidence? If reality is a simulation, then we are not just part of it, we are hostages to its limitations. We are doomed to find inconsistencies because they are inherent in the very nature of computation. And if we ever come close to understanding how everything works, the system may restart us, erasing our memory, or simply feed us false answers, like a mirror that shows not you, but who you want to be. Some physicists, such as John Barrow and Seth Lloyd, are already discussing the computational limits of the universe. Is there a limit to the number of operations our cosmos can perform? And if there is, then that is the framework of the simulation, its looking glass, the edge of the code. And beyond that, there is silence, nothingness, or something that our minds are simply incapable of comprehending. And here, Gödel's theorem comes into play again, so to speak. It says, if you are inside the code, you will never understand everything that is hidden in it. Your view will always be distorted by the mirror. Quantum entanglement is not just a quirk, it is a blatant violation of common sense. It is as if nature itself is playing against its own rules. Imagine two particles, millions of kilometers apart, suddenly becoming connected instantaneously. The state of one changes, and the other immediately knows about it. There is no time for signal transmission, no medium, no mechanism, just instantly, without reason and without explanation. And that breaks everything. From a classical point of view, information cannot travel faster than the speed of light. Violating this postulate is like striking at the foundation of all physics. Nevertheless, experiments confirm that quantum entanglement exists. It cannot be broken. It cannot be simulated classically. It is a natural phenomenon that no one fully understands. And here again, the theme of incompleteness arises. If the universe is a computable object, as theorists would like it to be, then such a connection is impossible. Computation requires sequence and therefore time. Entanglement, in which this sequence is simply broken, points to the existence of something outside of space and time, or at least outside of our understanding of them. Physics is beginning to lose control. Theories such as quantum mechanics make predictions that work accurately but cannot be interpreted without absurdity. Physicists operate with matrices, operators and vectors in abstract spaces, as if casting spells whose meaning eludes us. After all, even the act of measurement changes reality. It is as if the universe waits for you to look at it and only then decides what exactly you should see. What is this? A bug in the system, an illusion or confirmation that we are interacting not with objective reality, but with something dynamic, unsaid, adapting to the observer? Some scientists, such as Carlo Rovelli, for example, argue, there is no such thing as absolute reality. Everything is just an interrelationship between the observer and the object. It's as if the world adapts to every glance, to every player, like a game in which the world is drawn only where you look. But if this is true, then what can we know for sure? Where are the boundaries of knowledge if the laws of nature themselves wink at us like a magician before the finale? There are no explanations in the confusion, only results. And they say one thing: we do not control reality, we are guests in it. Or perhaps just observers for whom the show goes on. We will punish. Everything would be beautiful if it weren't for consciousness. It's as if at this point in the code of the universe, someone's hand trembled and something illogical, elusive, and unpredictable crept into the mathematically precise structure. Something that refuses to obey the laws of physics. Something that is conscious. Let's ask directly, where in the equations of quantum physics is there room for thought, for pain, for desire? Why among insensitive particles, fields, and forces does something suddenly appear that says, I am? Scientists are at a loss. For many centuries, consciousness has been attempted to be incorporated into biology. They say that the brain is a machine, neurons are wires, and personality is just a side effect. But the more physics tries to examine the nature of reality, the more absurd the attempt to explain consciousness as a purely biological phenomenon seems. In quantum mechanics, consciousness suddenly begins to play a strange, almost sacred role. Take the observer effect, for example. A particle can be both a wave and a point at the same time until someone looks at it. But as soon as consciousness directs its gaze, reality takes shape. This is where the craziest ideas come from. What if consciousness is not a product of the universe, but its foundation, a signal that there is an error in the code, and someone inside the system is beginning to notice it? Perhaps we are not observers of the universe, but its point of self-analysis. Some theorists, such as Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, go even further. Their theory orchestrated objective reduction, suggests that consciousness arises not in neurons, but in the microtubules of the brain through quantum processes that may be related to the very fabric of space and time. This means that consciousness is not localized, it is not inside the head, it is built into the architecture of the universe. Now think about it. Consciousness cannot be described mathematically or simulated. It cannot be calculated. It is experienced as if beyond dry algorithms, logic, and theorems there is something that knows what is alive, and that in itself goes beyond any formal system. Here we return to the geo-theorem. In any closed set of rules, there are statements that cannot be proven or disproven. What if consciousness is one of those statements? It is present, it has an influence, but it cannot be described from within the system. It cannot be expressed in the language of laws, but at the same time it influences those laws. It's as if a bug in a program started writing its own code. Perhaps without understanding consciousness, we cannot understand reality. Consciousness, in turn, cannot be broken down into separate parts because it is the force that arranges those parts in the first place. Think about it. you are watching this episode because you have already watched it. As crazy as it may sound, some physical models allow for this possibility. Yes, time can loop, twist into knots, and negate the very idea of causality. We are used to thinking of time as a straight line, past, present, future. But according to Einstein's general theory of relativity, under certain conditions, closed time-like curves can arise in spacetime. This means that an object can return to its past and become the cause of itself. In theory, such curves are possible near rotating black holes under conditions of enormous gravitational and energy distortions. The problem is that this is not just a nice mathematical trick. It is a concrete consequence of Einstein's equations. This is where the real chaos begins. If you went back in time and changed the event that led to your journey, what would happen to your cause? The grandfather paradox is a loop of predetermination, a scenario where the future influences the past. All this is no longer science fiction, and what is most frightening is that quantum mechanics seems to play along with this game. In the 2020s, experiments were conducted with quantum operations outside of strict order, where events can occur without a specific sequence in time. Example: two quantum elements exchange information in such a way that it is impossible to determine who influenced whom first. It's not just that we don't know. The question is meaningless because there was no temporal order there at all. Moreover, physicist Seth Lloyd and his colleagues proposed a model of a quantum time loop in which particles can interact with themselves from the future without creating paradoxes. That is, the intervention of the future is not only possible, it is written into the equation. It seems that the universe itself does not require linearity. We do, but it doesn't. And if that's true, who's to say that our consciousness isn't subject to the same distortion? Flashes of déjà vu, premonitions, epiphanies, coincidences, as if someone has already lived through it. Perhaps this is not a glitch, but a consequence of a time loop that we are simply unable to comprehend. Just as a fish in a whirlpool is unaware of its shape, cause and effect are fluid concepts, and that is precisely why all systems of describing reality are collapsing. What does a law mean if it does not work the same way in both directions? What then is the future if it already influences the past? We are used to time moving in one direction, like an arrow, but more and more data indicates that this may be an illusion of the observer rather than an objective law. Gödel's theorem shattered confidence in mathematics. The paradoxes of infinity have pierced a hole in the very structure of logical reasoning. Simulation hypotheses have turned matter into a possible backdrop. Quantum entanglement has destroyed classical linear thinking. Awareness has completely spiraled out of the control of science, like a living virus that has suddenly begun to edit the laws of reality. And finally, time, the last hope for order, turned out to be indirect, unstable, and looping. It no longer saves us from chaos. It is part of it. Each of these theories individually may seem like a mere speculative trick or exotic hypothesis, but together they paint a frightening picture. Our universe may be incomplete, inconsistent, and biased, and perhaps that is what makes it the way we perceive it. Now for the main question, what if the universe is not a machine, but a mystery, not an equation, but a paradox? Maybe we are not here to understand reality, but to notice that it does not add up. Perhaps our role is not to solve, but to doubt. And in this doubt lies the key to freedom, to perception, to the realization that truth is not always equal to knowledge. So if you ever feel that something is not as it should be, perhaps you have simply noticed an error in the code for the first time.